We've been doing a red letter study in here. And for those of you who don't know what a red letter study is, it is the words of Jesus that is sometimes printed in red ink in some editions. So we're right in about getting toward the middle of Matthew 7. So we're getting toward the end of the Sermon on the Mount here. And it's heating up, and it's just so packed with such great stuff. So it's been real interesting. I wanted to, as we're getting toward our target verse for today, I wanted to take a bit of a step back and remember the context in which and why we study these red letters, because it's so important for us to have a one-to-one connection with whatever we're studying in the Bible in our day-to-day moments. If we don't have that, then what's the point? We can't just be studying for studying's sake. There has to be a connection, something that informs us to make choices that are more other-centered, that are more present. Everything that we're about here, which is presence and connection. So I want to make sure that we're connecting with all of that. Most of you here are here because you want to find that deeper connection. You want to find that deeper awareness. I've talked to most of you, if not all of you, and it's about finding meaning and purpose that makes sense. And we're talking about mostly in the second half of life, which is not just chronological. The second half of life is when we switch to be looking for meaning from out there someplace, what we can accomplish, what we can build, what we can acquire, to meaning that is internal, meaning that is here, meaning that is permanent, meaning that doesn't end at the headstone. And so in this second half of life, when we're looking for meaning and purpose, and ultimately identity, who are we? This is what we're about here. This is what we're trying to do. Now, unfortunately, Western Christianity has largely focused on salvation. And by that, salvation means getting into heaven and avoiding hell. That's a very different proposition if you think about it. If the focus is on getting into heaven, gaining God's approval, avoiding punishment, looking at heaven as a reward for a good life lived here. Now, on one hand, that's really easy to understand, right? And most importantly, it doesn't challenge our worldview one bit. Because the worldview that we have, the understanding of life, understanding of reality that we have as modern Westerners, but really just as human beings, is that you got to give something for something, that there has to be performance for approval. There has to be a good job for reward. It's a legal system. And the way that the church has presented the gospel to us, by and large, has conformed perfectly with that. And so it's easy to understand. We can grasp it. It doesn't challenge us. All we have to do is follow the rules. If we follow the rules, then we're going to be okay. But if we're really looking for a deeper awareness, a deeper connection, if we're really looking for that true identity, that's going to be something that we don't grasp directly, which is so maddening when it gets to the contemplative life. But it actually is a byproduct of being willing to look in a completely different direction than what our lives and our experience and a lot of our teaching would have us believe. That's what Jesus is all about. Presenting this completely different direction, pointing in a completely different direction than we are used to. Now, this is something that's hard to understand. Actually, this is something that we can't fully understand because it's not rational. The spiritual life is not rational. We can't understand it directly, and we can't express it directly either. That's why the language of spirit is always metaphor. It's always figurative speech. It's always elusive. It's always image-based, because we need that to point us in these directions that can't be expressed directly. We're pointing in a direction here. But here's the problem with all of that. And I want to direct you. You can look in your handouts if you want to follow along. But this is the introduction to Richard Rohr's book called Everything Belongs. We did a book study on that years ago. But I love the way he puts this. He calls it inherent unmarketability. How do you make attractive that which is not? How do you sell emptiness, vulnerability, and non-success? How do you talk descent when everything is about ascent? How can you possibly market letting go in a capitalist culture? How do you present Jesus to a Promethean mind? How do you talk about dying to a church trying to appear perfect? This is not going to work. Admitting this might be my first step. Now listen to what he's saying here. And this has been the problem here at the Effect. I mean, look around. We're not bursting at the seams here, and we're not huge. But we've been trying to sell something that most people don't want to buy. It comes right down to it. It is this difficulty. How do you make attractive that which is not? When we're talking about emptiness, when we're talking about vulnerability, when we're talking about descent, stripping everything away that we think we know, being willing to let go of everything that has sustained us as far as we know, the things that we have grabbed onto, the things that we've relied on, the things that we've been taught out of our fear and our trauma and all of the experiences of our lives. How do you market letting go to human beings, especially in a capitalist culture that is all built on acquisition, all built on consuming more and more? He says, how do you present Jesus to a Promethean mind? I mean, you got to unpack that just a little bit. You remember Prometheus from Greek mythology? Prometheus is one of the Titans. He was the god of fire, but he loved humanity, even though most of the gods disdained humanity. He loved humanity. He is the one who's credited with bringing fire to humans for the first time. And not just fire, but the idea was technology, it was science, it was learning, it was civilization. He is credited with giving that gift to us, and he paid a price for it because Zeus was furious that he would give fire and give these gifts to humanity. And so he was condemned to be tortured every day for eternity, chained to a rock while an eagle, which is the emblem of Zeus, came and ate his liver. And then at night it would grow back, and then the next day it would happen again and again and again. And Heracles eventually rescued him, in case you want to know there's a good ending to the story. But Prometheus is the symbol of technology, of science, of learning, of acquisition, of everything that we see, especially in our Western world. That would be the Promethean mind. The Promethean mind is one who thinks that way. That we need more. We need to gain more control. We need to understand more. We need to scientifically research and have empirical results. There's the Promethean mind. How do you market Jesus, the real Jesus, the authentic Jesus, the Jewish Aramaic Jesus, who was about relinquishment, who was about being a servant if you wanted to lead, who was about losing his life if you wanted to find it? If you think about it, what is filling churches today? The churches that are growing the fastest? Well, it's finding power in God. Our language bears that out. Power in God that will vanquish our enemies, that will fix our circumstances, that will right wrongs on a big scale. That's what we're typically looking for, and the language that we're using in our churches. Churches that use language that is trying to lift us up to some sort of perfection, to armor us against vulnerability, when vulnerability was the highest virtue for the first Christians and for Jesus, to create prosperity and wealth. In other words, to feed Prometheus with a Christian veneer. Those churches are growing. But what Jesus is calling us to is to be one with him. And who was he? He was the Anavim spirit. He was the one who was poor, had an attitude of poverty, even if rich. He was the one who exuded humility and servant leadership. Jesus is calling us to be one with him in that way, just as he is one with the Father. And what really blows our mind is that our Father in heaven, the one who created all of this, is also the one who washes our feet, the one who serves us as Jesus did. Jesus is calling us to be one with all of that, to admit our powerlessness, to be vulnerable, to be servants. It's not huge and it's not sexy, but this is what Jesus is calling us to. But even here we have an inherent problem with the way that we're trying to communicate. Does anybody remember Marshall McLuhan? Yeah, it's getting to be a pretty long time since Marshall was around. He was big back in the 60s and the 70s, but he was a Canadian philosopher. You don't get too many Canadian philosophers, do you? I mean, he's a Canadian philosopher, right? And he is also known as the father of media studies. He was huge on studying the media and the effects of media on mass populations. He came up with the message with the slogan that the medium is the message. Have you heard that one before? The medium is the message. What does it mean? What does he mean by that? He means that in any message there is content, but there also has to be some medium that carries the content. As he was looking at the media that was developing, especially by the 60s, now we had radio, we had television, we had movies, we had all these different types of media. He even predicted the World Wide Web 30 years before it was invented. He could look forward and see a time when that would be part of the media as well. The media actually carries the character of the content. And in his mind, the media had more influence on us than the content did. And even if that's not quite true, we can definitely say that the media has at least as much effect on us as the content. I mean, what's the difference between reading a book and watching a movie? It's a huge difference in terms of the media. What's the difference between a phone call and a Zoom video teleconference? What's the difference between a text, an email, and a phone call, and now social media? All of this media affects us deeply at levels that we don't even truly understand. More and more it's coming out how much this media is affecting us, and it's not really good news, especially to our children. But the media is the message to a large extent. And the problem is that how we communicate Jesus' message is antithetical to Jesus' message itself. And that's a problem. We're trying to communicate a message in a way that doesn't convey and is antithetical to the message. What do I mean by that? Jesus' message is EPIC, and that's an acronym. So EPIC stands for experiential, participatory, image-based, and communal. And this is Leonard Sweet's formula for the way that our youngest generations are processing information. Think about the young people. You know, you give them an iPhone, and give them a telephone. Are they going to look at the owner's manual and try to read through every little bit? No, they just pick it up and they just start punching buttons. They're experiential, right? They're participatory. Look at a concert with young people in it. They're as much of the show as whoever is on stage. They're participating in it, right? They're image-based. We can see that in all of our media. Image is much more prevalent, much more important in the conveyance of content than the written word anymore. And they're communal. They're connected, sometimes connected electronically, but they're connected. They're creating this more collective consciousness and connection than we do. In the ancient world, this is where the lights came on with me, because Leonard Sweet is talking about our youngest generations, and his whole point was, if we as a church are going to communicate with these generations, then we're going to need to be epic too, because they're not picking up our messages the way we're throwing them down. But what the light went on for me was when I realized the ancient world was epic too. That's exactly the way the ancient world operated. Experiential, participatory, image-based, and communal. That means those who wrote our scriptures were epic. They processed that way. What they wrote down was geared that way. And most importantly for us, the spiritual journey, absolutely epic. Now, what we do is exactly the opposite. Instead of experiential, we're propositional. We like to propose something. That's sort of what I'm doing right now. I'm proposing something to you. You can consider it, and you can decide if you're going to accept it or reject it, but we're proposing it. And then they're participatory, but we're representational. Again, that's what we're doing here. I'm here representing something to you. You're sitting in neat rows, and you're listening. Image-based. We're word-based, typically. Lots of words. And then finally, communal. Our whole country is built on staunch individualism. We are considering the individual much more than the community. The individual to us is more important than the community. The community exists to serve the rights and preserve the rights of the individual, where in the ancient world and many other cultures today, the individual only exists to serve the good of the community. So we're at odds here. Now, that isn't all bad. This is what we can do. Even Jesus would have taught in some way, in a representational way. But the words that he used were all image-based. They were metaphorical. He wasn't trying to build cognitive and rational towers in the sky. He was trying to evoke and point people in a direction. But this is what we need to do to have a balance. Remember, it's not either or, it's always both and. It's not that we are going to be epic and non-epic, that one is good and one is bad. But we need to understand at least that the point here is that Jesus' message is epic. And even as we represent it non-epically, it's only going to actually take us where Jesus is trying to get us to go when we do treat it and understand it epically. That means that when we act on it, when we experience it, when we participate in it, and when we see that we are part of this community, we're part of the oneness of everything that God has created, that's when this message starts to actually take off and be true in the way that Jesus laid it down as truth that will make us free. We're never going to be free considering a truth in our heads. It just doesn't work that way. When we take that truth into the streets of our lives, when we act on faith, which is the ability to act in the presence of doubt and uncertainty and lack of evidence, when we can do that and experience the truth of it, then everything takes off. That's the way it was with me. Yeah, see? He agrees. That was a hallelujah amen, by the way. I spent 10 years studying, and trying to understand this word, trying to understand everything, all of these years, and I learned a whole bunch, but I progressed very little when it came to my actual spiritual stance. I can honestly say I was probably just as neurotic 10 years later as I was when I started. Marion could probably tell you that as well. But it took 10 years for me to be able to understand that the spiritual life is wholly other than any other way that we go about trying to acquire or learn or progress or develop. The spiritual life is completely different than that. And Jesus always tries to explain things epically. Let's take a look at a couple of examples, see if we can bring this home. Take a look at Matthew 13, starting at verse 44. Actually, it's only verse 44. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and hid again. And from joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Now, doesn't that sound like a real long way home to you? He finds a treasure hidden in the field. Well, he's got the treasure now. Isn't that a good thing? But he reburies it. He rehides the treasure. Why would he do that? And then he goes and sells everything he has, so that he can buy the field that he knows contains the treasure. See, the focus here is not on the acquisition. The focus is on the relinquishment of everything that needs to go in order to be able to have the field that contains the treasure. Jesus is always turning things around. Our natural instinct is we're going to go out and we're going to get this thing by whatever means necessary, and we're going to grab it by the throat and we're going to make it ours. But it doesn't work that way. It can't work that way when it comes to spiritual matters. It's about letting go of everything that blocks us from the truth. And when we get down to the bottom of that dog pile, we can see something that we never saw before. It's about relinquishment. That's the focus. In Mark 10, verse 21, this is the story of the rich young ruler who comes and asks Jesus, "What must I do to obtain life that is eternal?" And looking at him, Jesus felt a love for him and said to him, "One thing you lack. Go and sell all you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And then come and follow me." There's that selling everything again. There's that relinquishment. And of course, this is a metaphor. Jesus isn't just talking about material wealth here. He's talking about whatever it is that we pile up in our life that comes to define us, whatever it is that we have learned to rely on, whatever has worked for us, whatever it might be, whether it's our looks or our talent, whether it's our degrees, whether it is material wealth, whatever it is that we have learned to rely on, are we willing to let go of that because it's not taking us in the right direction? If we are still acquiring, if we are still pulling in, if we are still looking out there for something that is already in here. At Luke 14, starting at verse 26, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." That is such a difficult verse. But as difficult as it is for us, imagine what it was in the first century in Judea, in the Galilee, where family was everything. To be outside family in that culture was tantamount to a death sentence. Everybody needed to be in community. It was a communal society, as most ancient cultures were. To be in the family was everything. To be cast out was the outer darkness to them. And so here we are. Unless you hate your own father and mother, now hate there in Aramaic, sanah, does not mean a malicious hate the way we think of it is. It's just to prefer less. What he's saying is if you are so beholden and so focused on everything that holds your physical life together, even down to the community and to your own family, then you are going to miss the greater truths that are here for you. You need to be willing to let go of everything in order to be able to get to the bottom of that dog pile and see something you've never seen before. He backs that up with whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. And then finally, anyone who does not give up all he has cannot be my disciple. It's the same theme over and over and over again. If you take a look at Jesus' message, take a look at those red words with this in mind, and you will see him pounding on this over and over, saying it 100 different ways, but the same message. Are you willing to let go? Are you willing to relinquish everything that you think makes you powerful and invulnerable in favor of being that child-like presence? So it's not about learning. It's not about acquiring, but it's about unlearning, and it's about relinquishment. The spiritual life is that journey that's unlike any other experience, except falling in love. Falling in love has all the same parts to it that Jesus is talking about when he talks about kingdom. Because falling in love is when we lose the sense of boundaries of our own egoic mind. Everything falls away and we're just connected one-on-one. We're not thinking rationally anymore. We're just thinking image-based and connection. But the spiritual journey is going to be more like that than it will be anything that you find in seminary. I wanted to read you a kind of, it's not too long, but a little story. I love this story. And it comes from a completely different tradition. It comes from ancient China. It comes from the Taoist tradition. And Taoism, to me, is the closest to Jesus' message of any other tradition. It's amazing how much they sync up. And even though I'm reading from another tradition, it's because it syncs up with Jesus' teaching. If we can hear it from another tradition, often it can illuminate some things that we just don't see anymore because we're so familiar with the scriptures as we know them. And really, think about how this is every single person's dilemma who tries to go down this spiritual road we're talking about, who tries to engage in contemplative practice, where we're stepping aside from our buzzsaw minds that are always spinning, right? To step away from all of that chatter, distraction, and noise. We have the same reaction to that as human beings, whether it's the 4th century in China, whether it's Jesus in the 1st century, or it's here now. It's always the same, and it's amazing how similar it is. Take a listen. This is called King's disciple. A disciple, and this would be in the Taoist tradition, complained to King, who was his master and his teacher. The eyes of all men seem to be alike. I detect no difference in them. Yet some are blind. Their eyes do not see. The ears of all men seem to be alike. I detect no difference in them. Yet some men are deaf. Their ears do not hear. The minds of all men have the same nature. I detect no difference between them. But the mad cannot make another man's mind their own. Here am I, apparently like the other disciples, but there is a difference. They get your meaning and put it into practice. I cannot. You tell me, hold your being secure and quiet. Keep your life collected in its own center. Do not allow your thoughts to be disturbed. But however hard I try, God is only a word in my ear. It does not ring any bells inside. King Sun replied, I have nothing more to say. It is not so much a difference of nature as a difference of capacity. My capacity is too slight to transform you. Why not go south and see Lao Tzu. The disciple got some supplies and traveled 7 days and 7 nights alone and came to Lao Tzu. Lao asked him, "Do you come from King?" "Yes," replied the student. "Who are all those people you have brought with you?" The disciple whirled around to look. Nobody there. Panic. Lao said, "Don't you understand?" The disciple hung his head. Confusion, then a sigh. "Alas, I have forgotten my answer." More confusion. "I have also forgotten my question." You know where he's going with this. Who are all those people with him? It was all the contradictions he was carrying around in his spirit. Everything that was just buffeting him and making him crazy. That's what Lao was talking about. And Lao said, "What are you trying to say?" The disciple, "When I don't know, people treat me like a fool. When I do know, the knowledge gets me into trouble. When I fail to do good, I hurt others. When I do good, I hurt myself. If I avoid my duty, I am remiss. But if I do it, I am ruined. How can I get out of these contradictions? That is what I came to ask you." Does that not sound like Paul? When Paul was talking about, remember this, the passage, why don't I do the things I want to do? And then I, don't do the things that, and then what a miserable, it's the same experience. When we get on this path, it's going to just blow us about. If we stay the course, we can get through it. But it's really difficult. Lao Tzu replied, "A moment ago I looked into your eyes and I saw you were hemmed in by contradictions. Your words confirm this. You're scared to death, like a child who has lost father and mother. You're trying to sound the middle of the ocean with a 6-foot pole. You've got lost and are trying to find your way back to your own true self. You find nothing but illegible signposts pointing in all directions. I pity you." The disciple asked for admittance, took a cell, and there meditated, trying to cultivate qualities he thought desirable and get rid of others which he disliked. 10 days of that. Despair. Look what he's doing. Look what he's trying to do with his meditational time. Thomas Burton had a perfect word for it. He said people sometimes come to the monastery and they make contemplative faces at themselves in the mirror. I love that image. This is what he's trying to do. He's trying to make contemplative faces at the mirror. He's trying to do what he thinks he's supposed to do and look the way he's supposed to look. But you can't live life as a negative. You can't just take out the things that you don't want. He's trying to repress those. He's trying to wish those into the cornfield, and it doesn't work. He's striving for a perfection that will always elude him. And he's trying to fix things with a Promethean mind, even though he's in 4th century China BCE, 300 years before Jesus. So after 10 days of that, Lao says, "Miserable, all blocked up, tied in knots. Try to get untied. If your obstructions are on the outside, do not attempt to grasp them one by one and thrust them away. Impossible. Learn to ignore them. If they are within yourself, you cannot destroy them piecemeal, but you can refuse to let them take effect. If they are both inside and outside, do not try to hold on to God. Just hope that God will hold on to you." The disciple groaned. When a farmer gets sick and the other farmers come to see him, he can at least tell them what is the matter. His sickness is not bad. But as for me, in my search for God, I am like a sick man who takes medicine that makes him 10 times worse. Just tell me the first elements. I will be satisfied. Who does that sound like? Remember Philip in the Last Supper? Just show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. It's the same sentiment. It's the same desire that we have for something that is certain, something that we can see and have edges on that we can grasp. But it always eludes because the spiritual journey is not like that. We can't acquire it. We will never get the certainty rationally that we are looking for. It doesn't work that way. Lao Tzu replies to him, "Can you embrace the one and not lose it? Can you foretell good things and bad without the tortoiseshell or the straws? Can you rest where there is rest? Do you know when to stop? Can you mind your own business without cares, without desiring reports of how others are progressing?" I don't know if that reminds you of anything, but it reminds me of the Lord talking to Job from the whirlwind at the end of the book of Job. What does he say to him? Right? He's asking him all these questions. He wants to know all of this. Why did this happen? Why is this going on? And the Lord says to him, where were you when I set the foundations of the universe? Where were you when I put the stars in their place in the firmament? Where were you when I told the oceans you can come this further and no further? Here is where your proud waves stop. It's the same non-answer. The Lord is basically saying to Job, I am God, you're not. Get over it. Because there's nothing else that can be explained to you in your finite mind that would help you a bit. And it would only deter you more, distract you more, the more information that you get. Lao Tzu continues, can you stand on your own feet? Can you duck? Can you be like an infant that cries all day without getting a sore throat, or clenches his fist all day without getting a sore hand, or gazes all day without eye strain? You want the first elements? The infant has them. Free from care, unaware of self, he acts without reflection, stays where he is put, does not know why, does not figure things out, just goes along with them, is part of the current. These are the first elements. The disciple asked, is this perfection? Lao replied, not at all. This is only the beginning. This melts the ice. What is he saying? Before anything else can be achieved in this spiritual quest, there has to be a pushing off, a letting go. There has to be that selling of everything, that accepting of dependence, that accepting of vulnerability and powerlessness. Those are the first elements, but they're not something that you learn. It's not something that you acquire. It's something that you let go of in order to take the next step in the journey. This is only the beginning, he says. This melts the ice. This enables you to unlearn so that you can be led by God, be a child of God. If you persist in trying to attain what is never attained, it's God's gift. If you persist in making effort to obtain what effort cannot get, if you persist in reasoning about what cannot be understood, you will be destroyed by the very thing that you seek. To know when to stop, to know when you can get no further by your own action. This is the right beginning. And this is exactly what Jesus is telling us in different words. Unfortunately for us, more poetically, more metaphorically, not as even plain as this, even though this is difficult language and very dense as well, right? But when Jesus tells us the parable of the growing seed, he says the farmer goes out, prepares the soil, does everything that he needs to do, plants the seed, waters it, and when he's done everything that he can do, created the perfect environment for this plant to grow, he just goes home and goes to sleep. And it's while he's sleeping that the actual miracle takes place. He gets up the next day and here's a head of grain poking through the dirt. That's the way it works. We want to have control. We want to say we did something. But all we can do is create the perfect environment for an encounter to happen and then get out of the way. Because everything that happens of real significance is just a gift. It's always a gift. As long as we treat the spiritual life as a task to complete, as a problem to solve, we're going to be defeated before we go. And maybe we should just define what is spiritual, at least the way we're using it here. It's simply the way that we as humans seek and express meaning, purpose, and identity. And it's the way that we experience connection with each other, with God, with nature, with ourselves. That's what we're talking about in spirituality. It's not religious, but it absolutely is existential. It's that part that cannot be quantified rationally, but it's everything to us. If we don't have that piece, life makes no sense. There is no meaning and purpose, and we will never know who we really are. But if we keep treating the spiritual as a task to complete or a problem to solve, we're never, ever going to be able to take any further steps along the way. Spiritual journey, kingdom, which is Jesus' word and metaphor and structure for the spiritual journey, is not a task. A task has means and ends, right? The spiritual life has only means. There's no end. It's just what we are doing. It's the process that we're in. It's all process, if you would like. No outcome. Or maybe better, the outcome is the process, right? The medium is the message, right? This is where it keeps coming back to. We approach kingdom, we approach spirituality as a means to solve our human sense of lack, our human sense of need. It's a means to acquire more. But of course, that doesn't work. Jesus tells us at Luke 17, the kingdom will never be found out there by observation. You're not going to be able to say, hey, here it is, there it is. It's already within. It's among. It's in the midst of. It's right here. It's right now. If we take a look at Matthew 13 again, where he's talking about the treasure that's hidden in the field, which a man found and hid again, and from joy over it goes and sells all that he has and buys the field. The key here is that the man already knows where the treasure is. It's no mystery. He knows exactly where it is. So it's not about acquiring the treasure by seeking it somewhere out there. It's about selling and relinquishing everything, descending and decreasing and losing that Promethean mind so that nothing blocks the reality that we already have. Kingdom in the spiritual life is not about getting something we lack. It's letting go of everything that masks what we already have. And that is so hard to get across to us because it doesn't feel that way, right? If we think kingdom is somewhere over the rainbow, like Dorothy Gale, we're always going to be looking in the wrong direction. If we're starting from a sense of need, if we're starting from a sense of lack, then we're always going to be motivated by fear. And fear is always just going to breed more fear. It's never going to get us to love. Like breeds like, Jesus said. If we're starting from a place of abundance, though, that we already have everything, it's already within, then we can be motivated by gratitude, and that changes everything. Then we can be motivated by love. Jesus has been telling us in the passage that we've been reading in Matthew 6 and 7, not to worry and not to judge. Why is that so important? Because worry is motivated by fear of want and fear of need. That's what worry is about. We want something, we need something, so we worry about it. And that always takes us out of the present. Judging is always motivated by fear of punishment. And that takes us out of connection. Presence and connection are the hallmarks of kingdom, the hallmarks of the spiritual life that Jesus is trying to get us to engage. We must stop seeking to acquire and start selling to relinquish if we really want to take Jesus' journey. I know you've all heard of catch and release, right? Well, this is really release and catch. Only way that it works. Release, then catch. But then didn't Jesus say to seek and find? This is our target verse for this morning. Look at Matthew 7 and 8. We finally got to the target verse. Isn't that great? Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be open. Okay, so here we are. What is he talking about? Now we need to go back to the Aramaic to really understand. When he says ask, the word there is selu, which means like an intensive questioning. It's not just casual. It's like a police interrogation. It's related to the word selah, which means to pray. And we've talked about this before. In the Jewish mind, the word pray is actually a hunting term originally. It was to lay a snare for a small animal in the forest. Be very meticulous about it. Cover it up with leaves and then retire to a blind and wait for something to happen. It's a leaning forward. It's every nerve on a hair trigger. It's the presence and the expectation of an encounter. Selu is related to that. That questioning is this deep, intensive desire, this craving that causes us to clear a space and create that perfect environment for an encounter. And then he says to seek, which is be'ah in Aramaic, which means to search diligently from inside to outside. But really what it's about is a passionate commitment to leave no stone unturned in ourselves, to remove everything that hinders us, everything that limits us, to sell everything that would get in our way, and be willing to sell everything, even if we think it's worthy, because we know it's going to come back at some point if it's not limiting, if it's not hindering. But how will we know which ones are? Only when we're willing to let go of them all. Seek, be'ah, is that kind of search within. It's kind of like steps 4 through 7 of the 12 steps, for those of you who are 12-steppers, right? To do your fearless moral inventory in step 4, and then to admit it to God, another person, and to yourself, to actually speak it out loud, to become entirely ready to let God remove anything that is limiting you, and then finally to ask God to step into the realization of it. It's that kind of process that we're talking about. And finally, when he talks about knocking, the word there is kosh. And that literally means to pitch a tent or to strike a musical note. And you think, what in the world is going on there? But this word is also a form of kadash, which means holy, which means to be set apart. It means to dedicate something for a specific purpose. They both have roots that suggest the preparing of ground, once again, for planting, that meticulous process of creating an ideal environment. The image of a bent head over prepared space. What we're talking about here is to make something real, to realize something. When presence really becomes real, then they can hear the music that we are making. It is now realized in the space. They can shelter in the tent. They can shelter in the space that we have created. That's what the knocking is about, more than just another attempt at getting something that we don't already have. This is the process of kingdom. It starts with this intense desire and the willingness to release everything that would stand in the way, and then the realization of something completely different. Maybe something that we didn't even expect at the outset. And so if you are really serious about your spiritual journey, if you're really serious about following Jesus, there are probably 2 questions that you want answered. And maybe you haven't formulated them specifically in your mind. But the 2 questions are, who am I? And why am I here? Doesn't that really sum it up? Who am I? Why am I here? Francis of Assisi is in legend, is said that he would pray all night, every night, who am I, Lord, and who are you? Who am I, Lord, and who are you? It was a mantra that he just kept saying to try to drive his awareness. Who are you? Why are you here? If you really want to know badly enough, will you be willing to let go? Will you be willing to release all the distractions, all the illusions, everything about your small self, your programs for survival and happiness, really a lifelong process? Are you willing to do all of that is so difficult, so disturbing, even traumatic, in order to catch God's drift? Because if you will purpose to do that, what is left after everything else that is false or limiting is gone is the truth that makes us free. But that's the process. We don't acquire it. We relinquish our way back into it because it's already here. Everything is already here. It's already ours. We don't need to acquire. We need to relinquish everything that is standing in the way and blocking us from that reality. And it won't feel like any journey that you've ever been on. It just feels like you're living your life. But you're living your life on purpose, intentionally. And then at some point, you get to that place where you realize you're actually enjoying the ride. And then it all comes together. Let's pray. Father, this is amazing stuff. It's beautiful, but it's so counterintuitive for us. Have patience with us as we go through everything that we need to go through to get to the point where we can take our first few tentative steps along this way. We really want to make this journey, but we're terrified of it at the same time. At least help us to get the first elements that they are a relinquishment and not an acquisition. That we can set our feet in that direction and see if day by day and step by step we can gather the courage and the faith to continue to place one foot after another in this direction that you have told us is the only way back to you. That's our fervent prayer, Lord. Help us in any way to gain that courage, to take those steps, to risk what we think we're risking in order to have everything that you've already prepared for us. Thank you, Lord, for this love and attention. Never let us forget we can only love because you loved us first. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's all stand.